sweat and splinters. Forest elders breathe their last. I'll bring them for your supper.
Hey y'all, Kelly Moody here. Welcome to the Ground Shots Podcast, a podcast exploring our relationship to ecology through conversations and storytelling. Hello from a parking lot somewhere in western North Carolina. I don't have really consistent Wi-Fi or cell phone service where I am living right at the moment, so I'm gonna be finding parking lots for now to be working in where I get enough cell service to hotspot or find Wi-Fi to catch. It's so beautiful in southern Appalachia right now. The spring in the mountains here is amazing. It's been over 5 years since I've witnessed spring in this area, and I'm just amazed as ever by the spring ephemerals and all of the magic that's here that really is so unique to Appalachia and southern Appalachia in particular too. So many plants are endemic to this region and are coming up right now and only have a short moment that they blossom and then they fade away. So coming back full circle after many years of not being here in the spring and having spent several springs here in the past, it's just been a sweet experience. So this episode of the podcast is a conversation with Sean Croke of the Hawthorn School of Plant Medicine. Sean reached out to me actually on Facebook a few months ago, and he had listened to the Laura Pendell podcast episode. If you haven't listened to that one, I can't remember off the top of my head at this moment which episode it was. But Laura is the partner of the late Dale Pendell, who many people who are into plants and poison plants and ethnobotany know Dale Pendell's writings, Pharmaco Trilogy, and he was just fascinated by that episode with Laura. And in that episode, Laura mentions this book that Dale was working on before he died about his prison experiences in, I believe, Mexico and the U.S. He wrote about the differences in those experiences, and pretty different than what he usually writes about or wrote about. And it's not available for the public, but Laura's contemplated getting it together with an editor to put out into the world. And so Sean was reaching out, wondering how he could make that happen somehow. Not up to me, but I'm hoping that will happen. Kind of send Laura an email and ask her what she's thinking about that project, because I think a lot of people would probably appreciate getting to read some of Dale's unpublished works. So Sean is a wildcrafter, gardener, practitioner, medicine maker, and teacher. He lives on a 25-acre plot of land with his family and a bunch of other humans, animals, and plants near so-called Olympia, Washington. He's a father and loves to take care of living things of all sorts. And he is the head teacher and founder of the Hawthorn School of Plant Medicine, as mentioned earlier, a 9-month program that connects plants to people by visiting the many different landscapes that exist within the Pacific Northwest and the plants that live upon them, while also teaching cultivation, medicine making, and clinical skills. Sean runs a small herbal medicine company called Understory Apothecary that produces small batches of extracts and fresh plant material from either the farm or the wilds. Sean graduated from the Evergreen State College in 2012 with a BA and BS in ethnobotany and organic chemistry. He was a practitioner and the main medicine maker for the Olympia Free Herbal Clinic for 5 years, now unfortunately closed. So in this conversation with Sean, we talk about the Olympia Free Clinic and how that project evolved and what the ins and outs of that, running that was for the time that it was going. We speak about Sean's herb school and how running an herb school during the pandemic that's mostly in the field and in person has been definitely a tricky endeavor. We talk about Sean's book and his process of writing it, on the seasons in the Pacific Northwest, and more. So before we get to this episode and conversation with Sean, I wanted to let y'all know again, there is a Patreon page for the podcast. You can get to it at patreon.com/ofsedgeandsalt. You can always find the link to our Patreon in the show notes of every episode and all over the website at ofsedgeandsalt.com. And I like to do Patreon only content as much as I can. And this episode, Sean's going to be giving away to Patreon members a piece of writing, and you can access it by becoming a member on Patreon. Also, I wanted to let y'all know recently that Sarah Galvin, a few episodes back, a lot of folks really enjoyed Sarah Galvin's conversation. Sarah of House of Yore also provided access to a class she taught this past fall, and I'm really excited about actually listening to that and watching that myself. Really wanted to attend that class when she hosted it. So that's already up, and soon after releasing this episode with Sean, we will also be putting up for patrons his freebie for y'all, and you can join at any tier. I only have a couple smaller tiers available right now, and any support by folks out there I really appreciate. And for folks who've been supporting, I really, really appreciate that. And it's really kept this podcast going. And I just love getting messages from Patreon members as well and having conversations with y'all. So let's go ahead and get to this conversation with Sean Croke of the Hawthorn School of Plant Medicine. Happy listening, y'all.
My name is Sean Croke. I live on Chehalis territory in Little Rock, Washington, which is a little rural town about 20 minutes south of Olympia, Washington, which is like the state capital. And I'm like an herbalist broadly. I run a school which is called the Hawthorn School of Plant Medicine, which is a 9-month program, basically an introduction to herbalism. We meet one weekend per month for 9 months, and it is mostly outside, mostly out in the field, and it's a lot about meeting the plants, both wild and cultivated, that do well in this area, kind of as they are at their medicinal peak. So we start with lichens in January or February, cottonwood buds, and with like medicinal mushrooms and roots in October. I have a medicine making company, mostly tinctures, but I do also make some essential oils, and I don't do this as much, but I do provide fresh garden grown or wildcrafted plant material to other medicine makers that ship stuff to people, which is called Understory Apothecary. Oh yeah, I'm a dad and a partner. I live with my partner and several dear friends and my child. And mostly I have big herb gardens, and they're starting to get bigger. And we have a lot of people working with us on the land. Like someone's running sheep here and someone has a veggie CSA here, and we're kind of trying to figure out a farmy life that makes sense. Although none of us are full-time farmers, we all do other things. I am a clinical herbalist, or I'm like a practicing herbalist. I do see clients. That's probably the smallest percentage of what I do as an herbalist, especially these days, or like the last year in COVID, or the last year was complicated because I both actually had one of my busiest times ever as a practitioner, especially very early in COVID, when everyone was freaking out and didn't really know what to do. And that was actually really fun and beautiful and scary and a lot of things all at once. But yeah, so my current practice is mostly over Zoom, which is like not ideal for me for a variety of reasons. And also now that I used to live in town in Olympia, and it was much more accessible for people to come see me. So where I live currently, it's not very easy for people to just drop by, and I don't have like an office in town, although I hope to do that. But yeah, I do practice. Um, yeah, yeah, that's most of the things that I do.
Yeah, COVID is one of those things that I really have seen herbal medicine become more popular, or at least people being interested in land connection and plant medicine, as they're stuck at home or they're worried about their health and they don't see that mainstream medicine is necessarily actually helping sometimes, although
Yeah,
they're obviously with the vaccine,
yeah.
that's obviously helping too. But yeah, it's hard to really know what is going to happen when something like this occurs. It's such a big mystery, but COVID has really like gotten people interested, it seems like, in plants.
My favorite COVID herb story, if I may, is my mom is a nurse. She lives in Massachusetts. I grew up in Massachusetts. Um, and in like February, um, I was just like, maybe I'll reach out to my mom and see if she wants some preventative herbs or some supportive herbs, just in case, like after having looked at some of the Chinese medicine protocols that people are using. Um, and my mom called me right before I called her asking for the same. And I sent her a bunch of supplements and an herbal formula that she's a very compliant patient. She took very regularly, and she never ended up getting COVID. But the best part was she's had a lingering cough for years. Her lungs have been bothering her for many years, and it was mostly a lung formula for COVID reasons. And she was taking it for a couple months, and then one day she called me and she was like, "My lungs are better. My cough is all gone." Like my nephew pointed it out. It's the first time in years that wow, these herb things really work. This is so cool. And yeah, that was really exciting. And yeah, she was working in an emergency room in a COVID ward for the whole time, which was really scary. And she never got it, I think mostly due to good PPE use and good like policies in the hospital. But I like to think that she was on herbs and vitamins the whole time, and I think that helps.
Totally. Yeah. I mean, having good safety protocols and like integrating these plant medicines. Yeah, we were in Colorado last year and we harvested some plants from that area that we had with us that we would, I mean, mainly only use if we started to feel sick. And then my dad grew ginger this year in Virginia where we are, so we
Nice.
have abundance of fresh ginger around us, which is a nice like preventative too. And we were like guarding these roots that mainly they were root medicines. We're like,
Yeah.
okay, these are saving, these are so special now, they're really important to keep around. So
Yeah.
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 I'm curious, what is, for folks who aren't familiar with that bioregion where you are, what is special about it and like what characterizes that bioregion? I've spent a little time there, but yeah, for folks who haven't been there.
Yeah. Um, so where I live, or I mean, where I live right now is actually a very specific and kind of special, or what I love about the Pacific Northwest bioregion, and sort of broadly like Cascadia, if you will, being the area around the Cascade Mountain chain, which runs from Canada all the way down to Mexico, is that there's a wet side on the west side of the mountains, which is in between the Pacific Ocean and the mountains. All the water that comes in from the ocean hits those mountains and basically dumps a bunch of rain. And so it's a temperate rainforest essentially. And then the east side of the mountains, all the rain falls on the west side. So the east side of the mountains are arid and basically deserts, and almost all somewhat high in elevation because of the Columbia Plateau. The land is just higher over there. It's like 1,000 feet above sea level. And so mostly I have lived essentially in the temperate rainforest, which is, yeah, just a beautiful and very fecund and life-filled place. It's just like there's just life on top of life on top of life. All the trees are just covered in moss, and there's mushrooms growing on everything, and it's just like a really beautiful place. It feels very safe. Like there's very few toxic plants or poisonous animals or anything. It's like a very safe place to just sleep out in the woods. It's a really temperate climate. It rarely gets below freezing, maybe for a few weeks in the winter, and the summers are really beautiful and are a little bit of a secret. Or people who live here are like, don't tell people about the summers, because everyone talks about this area as being gray and rainy and kind of miserable all the time. But the summers are droughty and sunny and really beautiful. The summers actually for the last 5 years have been kind of stressful because it's turned into wildfire season. And so we had like 1 year off a couple years ago, but often for weeks on end, the whole area is just full of smoke, and it's pretty stressful. And where I live specifically right now is in the prairies, a little bit south and east of the forest. So it's this special, pretty small at this point, ecosystem, which is open, sunny, a lot of oaks. There's a lot of camas, or there's a lot of endemic plants to this area that are not really found in other places around here. Very much a human maintained landscape, traditionally and still. And yeah, it's a really beautiful place to be. It's fun to get some sunshine in this area, and it really changes the gardening. I'm used to gardening in the forest where you never get any sun, and now I garden out in the open where sometimes we get too much sun. Yeah.
Yeah, you said the fecundity, that word, like the first time I ever went up there, yeah, just experiencing the like softness of the understory and yeah, lichens hanging down from the trees. And you said you start your program with the lichens, and the cedars, and yeah, that moist, wet rainforest that's pretty conifer oriented, I feel like, a lot of the time. Versus here in the South where I grew up, and it is a temperate rainforest as well, but totally more of a deciduous jungle energy where you have like mosquitoes and ticks and chiggers and gnats and poisonous snakes, and it's very hard to just lay and relax in the forest. And there, everything is soft. You might be a little wet sometimes, unless you tuck yourself under, some leaf duff, but yeah, it's an interesting place, really magical.
It's such a beautiful place. I also, in the rain, you can just hide under the red cedars often. If you just get right up against the trunk, the rain doesn't really get all the way through, so that's just like a safe place to be. But yeah, I grew up in Massachusetts, which is also, and I think a lot of those East Coast deciduous forests used to also be evergreen forests before they all got cut down. But yeah, so it was such a, I got to this place and I was like, oh yeah, here, I'm just gonna stay here. I'm here so much. Yeah, it feels very like safe and nurturing. Something like this. Yeah, I've been here for almost 20 years.
Wow, that's awesome.
I love it very much. Yeah.
So you grew up in Massachusetts. Were you more in the city where you grew up, or in the countryside? I'm just curious.
I grew up in the suburbs of Boston.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, and then I came out here when I was 19 to go to school. Never went back.
Wow. Yeah. I lived in southern New Hampshire for a few winters and then a few growing seasons working on a farm. It was probably like an hour and a half from 2 hours from Boston. So it was like in the woods, but then, you could go to Boston really quickly. And it's an interesting place too, for me, coming from the South and all the hemlocks. Yeah, a lot of conifers, northern species of plants. And still different from the South here where I grew up, where I am right now, and all the yeah, it's just so interesting to see how different things are. And now that I'm learning more about how people tended land traditionally before colonization, it starts to change your perspective on what you're seeing where you are too.
Definitely. Yeah, what I was saying about the prairies, it's interesting, my process living here in terms of like how I understand the forest or the landscape. At first, coming from the suburbs of Boston where there's no woods basically, and getting out here, at first I was, anywhere I went out here, I'd be like, oh, this is the primeval untouched forest. They're so amazing. And then over time realizing everything has been cut, at least around me. There's very little up in the Olympic Peninsula. In the middle of it, there's some old growth, but everything has been cut 2 or 3 times mostly, which also speaks to the amazing ability of the forests to regenerate. And then over time learning how much of this landscape was and still is, although much less, tended by the indigenous peoples, and how much the landscape was shaped in cooperation with humans, which is very different than how I thought about this place when I first came out here. Just that it was like a wild, giving landscape that didn't need much attention or something like this. There's been a lot of cooperation of humans with the place to like make it so special.
Logging is like a huge industry in that area.
Yeah, I mean, logging is, it's not what it used to be because they cut all the forest down basically, but yeah, it is still a big thing. And it's, over time coming to understand that the forests that I once thought were these super wild places are actually basically dug for monoculture plantings. And it really changes the forest. And the cedars do come back. They're just slow. By the time they're getting to kind of their adolescent phase is when all the dug firs get cut down again, and then the cedars just sort of get squished in that process. So they don't really get a lot of chance to get big, except there's a lot of rivers here. That's a big part of the landscape too, and luckily a lot of the rivers have a really steep slope on either side of them, and the logging equipment can't get there basically. So you can still, like, if you just hug the rivers, you can still find some old growth trees, which is really special. The woods that I first started learning about a lot of the medicinal herbs that grow here in the forest was basically a ravine with a river at the bottom of it. And there's a few old growth trees there, and it's just right along the river is a pretty good example of what a quote unquote untouched forest would be. Although then 2 years ago, the area got clear cut, except right along the river. It was heartbreaking.
God, I can't even believe that's allowed now. I'm like, why?
It's private land, or whatever, people own it, and if you cut, it's probably like 40 acres. I think people make $100,000 or something, depending on sort of where your values lie. It's a lot of money. Or people think of that as like an investment, the forested lands, like a monetary investment, not an investment in living organisms. But it was heartbreaking. A lot of patches of plants that are shade dependent that I love very much, I managed to find them in all of the downed destruction, and they were just going to get fried with the sun. And I managed to transplant a bunch of them out to other places in the woods, and I have some of them like tucked here and there in shady parts here at the farm. So and I do again and again, or I am again and again impressed by the resiliency of the forests, and how, after these totally catastrophic events, even the really sensitive plants will sort of hide, under the fallen slash, and then the alders come back, and there starts being a little bit more shade, and then they creep back out. So, I don't know, the forests have been through a lot, and I think they're more resilient than I thought they were at first. And it's heartbreaking. Clear cuts are heartbreaking.
Yeah, like disturbance is an important part of the forest or in ecology in general, but like logging as a force that like de-spirits the place and commodifies every living thing is a type of disturbance that then just starts to get like more detrimental versus like reviving and regenerating,
Yeah, it's very different than like a flood, or a forest fire or something. And just the forests get cut down, and then all the silt goes into the rivers, and then that's killing the salmon, and then the salmon are what feed the forests, and it's messy.
I've spent a couple summers like doing some stuff in northern Idaho, which is pretty far inland from where you are.
Mm-hmm.
And it's more desert, as you go, or more, it's like there's the Cascades, and then there's a desert on the other side, and then there's like almost like other rain shadow things that happen, again.
Yeah.
And this was just like a little island of old growth cedars, surrounded by logging land in Idaho, that it was like 100 degrees out, and I was at this place where I was teaching and doing some things, and I was like, I need to get out of here and go find some shade. And they told me about this spot, and I went in there, and I was like, oh my God. And just like how far out it was from the coast where you normally think of those trees. And just how cool and comfortable it was in there on a 100-degree day. It was amazing.
Yeah, the forests are so nice. But I really notice it out here. The summers are a lot more overwhelming out here where it's open. If you go into town where there's a lot of trees, it'll be, I don't know, 10 degrees cooler or something. Yeah. And that is impressive that the cedars are way out in Idaho. Mm-hmm. Devil's Club is a plant that is endemic to this area, who's like a big character in this area. And there's little pockets of them out by the Great Lakes even.
Whoa.
Which I think is so interesting. I keep meaning to go visit them. And I wonder how they got there, if there was once a much larger, if they were much more extensive, or if like birds brought them there or something.
You say to a small earth, would you remain aloof to her if she could fit in the palm of your hand? Her wonders tiny and sparkling. What would you say to your child self? Would you remain aloof to her if she could sit in the palm of your hand? Would you close your fist? I want to be made whole. Feel my love. would you say to a small bird? Would you remain aloof to her if she could fit in the palm of your hand? Her wonders tiny and sparkling.
And there's something. But yeah, I think the forest used to stretch a lot further east.
So tell me a little bit more about your school. I'm curious, how long have you been running it, and how does it kind of work? And I know this year and last year with COVID, you've had to kind of adapt to that as well. But yeah, maybe tell me a little bit more about it. I'm curious.
This is year 7 of the school. Is that right? Yeah, this is year 7 or maybe 8. When I first started being an herbalist, I was mostly a wildcrafter and mostly self-taught. I just spent a lot of time like learning all the plants and getting out there, and people would ask me to take them along. And then I started doing casual group trips out to the woods. And then one year, my friend Erin Adams, who lived in this area for a little while, proposed that we do a class together, a series of classes together. She's more of a clinician, and she studied under Matt Wood and just has her own kind of system of diagnostics and ways of like reading the plants. It's like an elemental kind of thing, 4 or 5 elements. So she would do kind of the people part and I would do the plant part. And I was like, yeah, great, let's do it. Can we just call it an herb school? And can we call it the Hawthorn School of Plant Medicine? And so we did. And we kind of made it up as we went along. And people really liked it. And Erin actually left, I think even before the end of the first year. She did like 7/8 of the school and then moved to California. And then I just kept doing it. There's no like physical school. It's all in the field. These days we do meet at my farm pretty often. But it's mostly about being out in the field, and we get out in the weather and meet the plants. And it is a lot about wild plants, and especially at this point in the school, we're really trying to focus on teaching people propagation, and teaching. It's a lot about the plants as people, or interacting with the plants as people, and interact with the plants as sentient organisms, and trying to have reciprocal, mutually beneficial relationships with these plants. And I have a lot of concerns about overharvest and the ways in which wildcrafting can be trouble for the wild plants. And especially, I've heard some stories from Michael Moore's school in the Southwest, the Southwest School of Botanical Medicine, I think it was called, where some of the patches that he would bring people to, over time, they don't exist anymore. Like Howie Brownstein, who runs, I forget what it's called, his school out of Eugene.
Yeah.
It's in my brain.
What is it called?
Columbine. The Columbine School? Yeah, Columbine School. I take some inspiration from him. Like he really focuses on this a lot, and he takes people out to meet wild plants, and no one ever picks anything. And he actually has people like sign a contract that they won't pick anything and won't come back to the same spots, because he's like seen the ways in which that can go poorly. So I do still pick with people, but what I try to do is teach propagation first, and we do propagation together. Like we'll go out in the field to places where I've been going for a long time, and I really like to do plant sits with people where we'll sit with the plants, take a little bit of the tincture, and try to communicate with them or try to feel out what's going on with them and how they might be good for us. Essentially like a meditation, which is very fun and can give a lot of information. Or it's interesting doing group sits, how often, even if people know very little about the plant, people have a very similar experience of how it works in the body. So yeah, I try to teach propagation a lot, and we do some picking, although try to be very selective, and we make some medicines. I teach a lot about making medicines, and I teach a lot about gardening and ways to bring some of the like quote unquote wild plants into the garden at home and propagate them there. There's like a lot of plants that are even sort of scarce in the area. You can take a little bit of propagation material and kind of treat them well in the garden, and they'll become very prolific. And I feel like that's a really good way to work with the medicine. And yeah, I just try to teach people to have a slow and respectful relationship with the plants before kind of jumping into making it their job. Or I feel like it's really easy to, and I did this in my early days, it's easy to do the like kind of Pokemon gotta catch them all thing with the herbs, and just like be like, ooh, I'm gonna find every herb in Michael Moore's book, I'm gonna pick them all, I'm gonna make tinctures out of them all, and then they just end up on a shelf, and they so yeah, I try to teach people to slow down, and it's a lot about interacting with the plants, of the ecology. We go to the forests, we go to the rivers, we go to the prairies, we go up on the mountains, we go to the desert. Like we go to all of these different places, and I teach about the ecology and kind of how the plants, like what the plants do in these various landscapes, and a lot about indigenous, both like history and current lifeways in the area, which this area, has a thriving indigenous population, which is so nice. Kind of, I come from the East Coast where that is like not the case as much, especially in Massachusetts. And yeah, teach about landscapes, teach about the plants, medicine making a little bit. Like, when I'm talking about the plants, I'm definitely talking about how they like work as medicines and how they can be helpful as herbs. And I do get into some kind of clinical stuff, or how to talk to clients and different body systems and stuff like that. But I only really touch on that. And I keep thinking about making a second year program that would be more like kind of an intensive, 3 months, and you meet several days a week, and it's mostly lectures that goes into body systems and materia medica and all that sort of stuff. But I just never quite get around to it. So yeah, it's pretty small. I cut it off at 12 people, and we spend a lot of time out in the woods together, and we do a little bit of picking, and we do some gardening, and we plant things a lot. And it's like a sweet way. I make a lot of friends through the school, and it's like people make good relationships with the plants and kind of good relationships with each other. And at the end of the program, I feel like people have a nice little apothecary put together, and they've experienced several plants of this area and have just like learned a lot about this region. And I always like to say that don't rush into considering yourself an herbalist, or there's a whole, I think you can be an herbalist in a number of ways, but I see a lot of programs or situations where it's like you do a herb program and then they give you the certificate, and now you're like an herbalist and can put out your shingle and just start doing the thing. And my own process has been pretty slow, and I try to encourage people to also be pretty slow. And I think at the end of the program, I would encourage people probably to get more education before they would try to like make that their job or something. But I think at the end of the program, people are certainly have some skills to sort of take care of themselves and their friends and family better with herbs, and just, you know, have a lot of new friends, which are the plants. Yeah, I love it very much. It's my favorite thing that I do for money. You know, it fluctuates a lot, and it's not I have outside work too in general, but I really love running the school. And I almost thought it wasn't going to happen this year because of COVID. So many people are having a hard time economically right now, and not to mention the complications of getting together in person. But, you know, some people signed up, enough people signed up, and I'll keep it going in the future.
At least you can be outside and wear masks together outside, you know, versus like if you were in a school, in a classroom, and we're focused on teaching that way. But it's still difficult for anyone to know what's going to happen. It's so every day everything changes. So it's like, you know, at the beginning of the season, it's really not great to get together. But then by the end of the season, it might be a little bit easier. And but you know, it's just so hard to know. So it's definitely an odd time to figure out how to do things in groups. You know.
Yeah. Last year was so weird. And I really appreciate the students for, you know, several people left the program, and that's fine, but people stuck it out with me and we made it work. But yeah, it was weird. And luckily, I maybe have 7 or 8 people. And so, yeah, we're outside and we wear masks, and it's pretty easy to keep space from each other. So, and everyone is so starved for being outside and being around other people that I feel like just the school is really good for all of us just to get out and be with other humans.
Yeah, just for mental health.
Yeah.
Like, hanging out with plants and getting your hands dirty. It's always good.
It's so helpful.
Yeah.
And doing plant sits, even, you know, sometimes people have these really sort of profound experiences, and that's great. And if nothing else, you know, just sitting still and paying attention to how you feel and breathing deeply for 10 minutes is really nice and an easy thing to not do. So yeah.
I think the programs like yours that are really hands-on, I think are, when I was a young interested herb student, I was always drawn to when people were more inclined to take you out in the field and like be engaged with the land in that way, because the sensory experience of smelling, seeing, sometimes tasting the plants and is just a way of learning that is something you can't get from the classroom or like inside. I know that right now everyone's having to figure out how to use digital interface to teach about things, and there's a lot of digital oriented plant learning stuff out there now, which has its pros and cons. But I still think that nothing beats like getting out there. And I studied with Juliette Blancaspor before she did her online program thing. And her program was very much, we would do some on really rainy days or whenever we would do stuff, we would sit in her living room all crammed together and talk about anatomy and physiology. But mostly we were out in the fields and out in the mountains and getting out there and looking at the plants in the field. And that was how she advertised it too. And that was like, that's what I want to do. And I feel like it's so valuable.
It's really, as an herbalist, I'm very much a bioregional herbalist, and I don't really work with herbs that I don't grow or pick myself or have some direct relationship with. And so, that's how I like to teach too. I feel like it's a whole different thing to work with medicines when the plants are your friends and accomplices than buying dried plant material that you don't really know where it comes from. I think it's a whole different thing, and it's how I like to work. I would struggle to stay interested and engaged if the only way taught was in a classroom without being able to get outside very much.
Mm-hmm. So you you used to work for the Olympia Free Clinic. You mentioned that to me before we did this interview, and I don't know much about it. Like, is it still happening? Are you still involved in that? And what is what is that project all about? Like, because it seems like the free clinics we could use those everywhere, you know? Yeah.
Yeah. Unfortunately, the Olympia Free Herbal Clinic does not exist anymore. It ran for about 10 years and it closed down 3 or 4 years ago. It was a really cool project. Basically, a few of my friends started it as young herbalists fresh out of herb school in somewhat of like a DIY or punk manner, and it was a herb clinic, volunteer run, and mostly was a walk-in clinic, so anyone could come in and it didn't cost any money and they could get a consultation and get herbs from us. Yeah, and it sort of waxed and waned over the years. It was very much loved by the community, both by people that would come in as clients and also just as a way for herbalists to learn some clinical skills and get involved, or people would grow herbs for us or pick herbs for us, and it was a great way for people to learn stuff. We had a conference, which I think maybe you went to, the Dandelion Seed Conference.
One time.
Yeah, that was a fundraiser for the free clinic, the free herbal clinic. And that was really fun. We did that for, 5 years. And that was a good fundraiser, and also was just a great event where people got to meet each other and learn a bunch of stuff. And it was very much like social justice oriented. So I feel like people brought their best selves, or it was a very wholesome event. It was really fun. But yeah, running big projects like that entirely through volunteers is just challenging. And also the people would come and go a lot. Olympia is like a college town, and so people would get involved with the program and then be gone for the summer. They'd only be around for a few years and then they would move on. And basically it was challenging. The logistics of running the space was challenging, and sort of like interpersonal dynamics were challenging. And it often ended up kind of being like a burnout factory for people. I think, like a lot of sort of activist projects, people get really passionate about it and get involved and really put themselves into it. It was like very nourishing and satisfying in a lot of ways to help people out and to work with a group and to get your chops as a clinician, as a practitioner. But over time, it would just be exhausting, and people would drop out. And sometimes people would get really involved in the project and then be really burnt out on it, and then have bad feelings about it and be like, we got to just shut this thing down. It's too much. It's exhausting. And then for so long we were working with like no money. And then basically with the conference, we started making money, but it was never enough for people to get paid. And then people would become pretty good practitioners and want to get paid for it, basically, and start their own practice. But it's complicated if trying to start your own practice and make herbalism into a job when you're also practicing at this place where people can just go there for free and see you. Money is just like complicated, or
it's like we live in a capitalist world where we have to make a certain amount of money just to exist, and then you can't actually do some of the work that you want to do in the world without also having an energy exchange of money, right?
Yeah.
But of course, there's this part of us, especially folks who are more activist oriented and like social justice oriented, we want to get rid of capitalism altogether. We want to offer things for free and like want to
Yeah.
make it accessible. But how do you do that without, you know, you have to be able to have something to give, you know, to, and if you drain yourself in the process and then the thing can't sustain itself, that's definitely something that is people are figuring out more and more. Like, how do we hold the world we live in and the world we want to see together,
Right.
and take care of ourselves too, you know?
Yeah, it's super tricky. I think we were all also like pretty young, you know, everyone in the project, we were all like in our 20s or whatever. I still see some clients that I started seeing in the clinic for free still. And my own practice is sliding scale to zero. I try to like carry the spirit of that project. And I feel like, especially in the like gig economy, I feel like there's this sense that you should be making money off of your passion, but
I think sliding scale is a great option for offering people to choose. And usually when people can pay more, they will. And it often works out in the end. And it kind of helps you and be able to support yourself and like give that option of affordability too. So
yeah, I've been pleasantly surprised how often people will pay me on the upper end of the sliding scale, even if I would imagine that that is like economically difficult for them. I've also had people like at the start of COVID, I sort of made up a few formulas that I thought could be helpful, and I was just selling them and just kind of giving them away if people couldn't afford them. And I had more than one person get in touch with me and just be like, can I just give you money? Because what you're doing is cool. People will give you so much good food, or like I've had people come and help me clean up my garden, or people are very generous and reciprocity abound.
mm-hmm.
But yeah, it's like, I feel like herbalism is tricky in general to, yeah, people want it, you know, it's not, herbalist is not my full-time job. I always have some other stuff going on to sort of support it so that I can be as generous as possible. And sometimes it's easy to feel like that is like a failure or something, but it's, yeah, it's important to keep things accessible. Yeah, the money thing's tricky. Money thing's tricky. And yeah, it's tricky to try to live in the world that, you know, we envision. But that's actually not how the world works right now. And trying to find that balance is hard and important. And, you know, being like gentle with ourselves is really important. I miss the free clinic. I hope that there'll be some iteration of it again, or something like it again. I think we moved into a sliding scale model also near the end, and we were like trying to figure out how to pay people. There was just too much, like sort of years of interpersonal complications going on, and it was just time for the project to end. But I hope that there will be another iteration of it someday. That's my dream.
Cool.
And I've seen other people around the country making them and having them work out, and it's a really like fun project and a good model, I think. Yeah, and yeah, I think back fondly on that experience very much, as much as sometimes it was really like overwhelming at the time.
So you told me that you finished a book, you're working on a book, you're almost done with a book that you started maybe during COVID, or at least got a lot of work done on it during COVID. Can you tell us a little bit about that? And yeah, just a little bit more about that project.
So last year, as part of my school, I wrote like a small essay for the first class, mostly because it can be challenging for people to take notes in my school, especially in the early classes. We're often out in the rain or the snow or whatever. And I've gotten that feedback before that I'm kind of a fast talker. You know, there's a lot of information that I say, and it can be hard for people to absorb it. And so I wrote a short essay for the February class covering kind of the basics of what I talked about to give to my students so that they didn't have to worry about it if they didn't take notes. And then the pandemic happened, and I had a lot of free time. And so I expanded upon that essay. And then each month before the class, I wrote a pretty big essay covering all the material that I talk about in class, and then often kind of expanding even more, like doing some research beyond what I've done in the past and getting some more history stuff down, or talking about some history of how different cultures think about the different times of year that the classes take place in, and going deep into the plants and some of my own like life history and my own interactions with the plants and stories of interacting with the plants and clients. And yeah, just like really going in depth about the plants and the places and the time of year that each of the classes covered. So it ended up being, between like 10 and 15 pages for each of those essays. And so by the end of the program, it was over 100 pages of material. And then I did a few extra ones, wrote about medicine making, wrote about plant sits, an introduction, and yeah, decided it was a book, basically. So yeah, I'm tentatively calling it One Time Around the Wheel, because it basically tracks from winter solstice to winter solstice, essentially. It's done. I wrote it, and I've done some editing on it. Like I would write the essay, edit it once myself, give it to my students, and I have it all written. And I'm currently, it's like 130 pages or something like this. And I'm like, I need someone else to edit it now. I need someone else to look at it. I'm kind of overwhelmed by it, but I'm talking to several friends who are editors, and I think I'm going to pay someone to edit it for me. And then I am going to publish it. I have a few friends who run small publishing houses, and I might have one of them do it. At first I was thinking about I had like some people in Olympia are printers basically, and just having a small amount of them printed for myself to give to my students. But I am interested in getting it published, and I'm just starting those conversations with people. But yeah, currently it's like a big, and I feel a little bit messy manuscript. It was basically like my COVID project. It was super helpful to me to have like a thing to do over the pandemic. I feel really good about it, and I think that people will enjoy it, and it would be a really good way to learn about this place and the plants that live here and the people that live here.
COVID was definitely a time to do projects like that.
Yeah.
Or you don't have a lot of other things going on, and it's time to sit and write and focus and get internal. Yeah.
So I'm almost grateful to the pandemic for that reason, but not really. Yeah, and the whole thing is really influenced by the pandemic. I talk about it a lot. Or it's an interesting like record of this period in history too. So but I hope it'll be out in a year or something like this.
I look forward to seeing it when it comes out.
Yeah. I'll send you a copy whenever I make it. Yeah.
So, how can people find you online or get in touch if they're interested in your school or learning about what you do?
Yeah, I'm currently taking a break from social media. I actually like deactivated my Facebook account for a little while, but I will probably be back on there at some point. So yeah, I'm usually on Facebook. My name is Sean Croke. My school is on there, the Hawthorn School of Plant Medicine, and my medicine making business is on there, Understory Apothecary. I do have a website for both of those also. Understoryapothecary.com is my business, and it's hawthorn-school.weebly.com, or if you Google the Hawthorn School of Plant Medicine, it's easy to find my website. And yeah, I'm much more of a plant person than like a marketing or online person, so all of my, especially my business website, it has remained a skeleton for many years. But that's pretty easy ways to find me, and my email addresses are on both of those websites, and I'm pretty responsive to email. And yeah, I'm really trying to, I think I'm going to start an Instagram, and I keep imagining that I'm going to be more of a online presence kind of guy, and we'll see if that happens or not. My impulse control around social media is very poor. And it can often be detrimental to my mental health and my sleep patterns. So I'm always like trying to balance it out. But yeah, it's such a good way to meet people and interact with people. So yeah, I don't know. I often dream about just like going analog, or something like that. But yeah, I've also met so many interesting people and made so many great connections through the internet. So, but yeah, that's the easiest way to get in touch with me.
Cool.
And yeah, the school is from February to November, and I do now do a fully online program that this is my first year doing it. And basically I send out the essays, and I send out videos, and I ship people tinctures to taste and things like this. And there's like a Discord server, like a forum for people to talk on. So that's a way for people who would be interested in taking the school that don't live near me to do it anyway. And that's going well so far. But yeah, those are the easiest ways to get in touch with me.
Cool.
Yeah.
Well, thanks for taking the time out of your day to talk with me for an hour or so here on the podcast. I appreciate it.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
Than the flame that limits the world. You, darkness, of whom I am born. I love you more than the flame that limits the world.
You just listened to a conversation with Sean Croke of the Hawthorn School of Plant Medicine. The interstitial music for this episode is Lost Grin by Vaughn Aid, and the theme music, as always, is Sweat and Splinters by Mother Marrow. Until next time, y'all.